Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining this assembly today. Today, we are all gathered here to talk about you guys, medical workers, more specifically, you psychiatric nurses. You have raised some concerns regarding high mental stress you guys have been experiencing, and we have come up with a wellness plan to address these problems. So, if you could look at the chart here, it shows the number of medical workers within 1,000 population in Hong Kong from 1990 to 2016. If you focus solely on doctors and nurses, which are the most common medical workers you'll encounter in a hospital, we can see that from 1990 to 2016, there's an increase of 4 to 7 nurses among every 1,000 population in Hong Kong, and there's only 1 to nearly 2 doctors among every 1,000 Hong Kong population. The overall increase in nurses is much higher as compared to doctors. So this should mean that nurses has less workload, as there are more and more new nurses joining throughout the years, right? But why is it that although there are higher increases in nurses as compared to doctors, yes, yet the nurses are the ones that are still more pressured than the doctors? This is because of their workload. It's much different than the doctors. The doctors assess symptoms, diagnose conditions, prescribe and administer treatment, provide with follow-up care for patients, and work with other nurses and physicians to with and other health professionals. However, for nurses, they need to assess the patients who are mentally ill, observe, give them the medication, observe the medication is if it is effective or not, and report it back to the doctors, as the doctors need to know their condition before they can continue to prescribe medication to provide further assistance and healthcare. The nurses are more prone to higher emotion and are sensitive as they spend more time with patients than they do with the doctors. But remember, these are not just one patient. They need to check up on multiple patients on a day-to-day basis while writing a report back to the doctors for each every individual patients. In 2019, the patient to nurse ratio was 1 to 10 in Hong Kong. It means every one nurse, psychiatric nurse, has to look after around at least 10 patients, with the possibility of more patients depending on the hospital and depending on the workers they have. This is detrimental as it is not only unhealthy for the nurses to take on so much workload and increase the level of fatigue, but it also poses a danger for the patients who could be affected, as when chances of mistakes happening among the nurses will increase. The smallest error within the medical industry can be life-threatening for the patients depending on the condition, and this is not a risk we are willing to take, let alone allowing an involvement of a patient from a mistake caused by us, the hospital authorities, the hospital directors, and the hospital workers. The Association of Hong Kong Staff has decided to call for the ratio to be reduced to 1 to 6. However, we're still working on reducing it to an even lower number because in other countries, such as Australia, the ratio within a medical ward is 1 to 4, and an emergency department is 1 to 3. And even the National Nurse United has proposed to federals that registered nurses to patient ratio should be 1 to 2 and not higher than 1 to 5, as it is the safest measure for both the patient and the nurse.
So the extreme workload can actually immensely affect the ability of psychiatric nurses to care for their patients. For example, taking the case of Kath, who is a psychiatric nurse that takes care of 65 patients with mental illnesses. So he looks after his patients' recovery and help them integrate into the society. And but because of the mass numbers of patients on his list, it's actually impossible to look after each of the patient's case by case in depthly. For example, him visiting the patient's homes, he can only give around 30 minutes for the patients, okay? And which we think that it is not effective enough to help the patient needs. He also mentions that the depression patients would talk a lot. So giving them 30 minutes would be of no use. And on top of that, it also needs to prepare reports within 3 days of a visit and modify plans necessary with a massive number of patients. So what does it actually lead to? It actually leads to extreme fatigue and high and heavy pressure workload. And a survey was also conducted that 43% of nurses got interrupted during the breaks because they not only need to follow up on patients' medical needs, but also need to assess if the patients are able to take care of themselves, of their basic activities in their daily life, and ensuring that anyone under their case are properly taken care of. Moreover, they also need to take an average of 60 patients, which is an extreme low workload, according to a reliable news. So these kind of things would actually leads to low social interaction among the colleagues and low motivation to work, which may result in the low quality of services. Next slide, please. So we have come up with a wellness plan hoping to improve the mental health of psychiatric nurses. And Osama will talk about the first one, which is the house therapy. Osama, please.
Thank you. Thank you. So our first method, which we believe to be the most effective one, is using psychotherapy counseling. Psychotherapy counseling is where a psychotherapist who is trained professional assists those who are suffering with mental illnesses such as stress, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, negative behavior patterns, etc. And also give a tailor-made treatment, as there are many types of treatment within psychotherapy that is most suitable for the individual itself. An example would be cognitive behavior therapy, which is focused on exploring relationship among a person's thoughts, feelings, and behavior, actively working with the person to uncover unhealthy patterns of thought and how they may be causing self-destructive behaviors. This would be really good for the nurses as they will definitely have a lot of pent-up stress from working non-stop. Another good, really, really good example is DBT, also, or you could call it dialectic behavior therapy, which was originally developed to treat chronically suicidal individuals with borderline personality disorder. This is a very common situation among the medical industry and among the medical workers that they are so stressed, they're so pressured, and they have no choice of escape that they lead to suicide, and which is really, really bad and the worst possible case scenario. Another reason for choosing psychotherapy is because of its high level of effectiveness. It is said that 79% of those that have attempted psychotherapy have been in a much better state than those that have decided to ignore their issues and not even attempt psychotherapy. The reason for its high effectiveness is because psychotherapy teaches patients life skills that last beyond the course of treatment. Psychotherapy reduces disability, morbidity, and mortality, improving work functioning, and decreases psychiatric hospitalization. Psychotherapy has been also implemented in other countries such as the USA, implementing free support lines to healthcare workers since the rise of a new pandemic that has made many workers, healthcare workers, to work longer hours and more shifts that are stressful and physically demanding, which has been affecting the well-being of the entire healthcare workforce. As of, as good as psychotherapy sounds, there are, however, limitations. This kind of therapy, firstly, is a long-term process. Research has said that most of the people attempting psychotherapy will take at least has taken at least 6 to 8 weeks before one can actually start feeling mentally better. It requires commitment. Of course, as a result, this will prove to be more healthy and everlasting as you will learn unforgettable skills. Secondly, it has a risk of being ineffective. It usually applies to only individuals with a severe case of depression and bipolarity, as it is hard for one to accept that overcoming this pain is possible and believing that they need help. People with severe depression are prone to giving up on themselves easily, which leads to not accepting help, which further deprives them into loneliness, which can this endless loops of constant pain could lead to suicide. And in this case, medication will usually be prescribed by a therapist. Thirdly, poor trust. A person with mental illness is already having a hard time socializing and expressing feelings properly within themselves and also with family members and friends. So talking to a stranger, whether or not they're professional, is even more challenging to open up at first. One still needs time before they can fully express themselves to another person that they do not well know properly. Lastly, it is not as effective and fast as drugs slash medications. Taking medications can indeed help an individual to stabilize their mental stress or illness almost within an hour. However, this is just a temporary treatment. It does not cure a mental illness, but just stabilizes it temporarily. It is not recommended unless it is a severe and it is prescribed by professionals. It is often used to calm oneself down so they can express themselves more properly. And it is dangerous. It is not recommended to the majorities because the reliance of drugs. If one is too reliant on these drugs, then they can lead to addiction, which drives a person further from treating their illnesses. Drugs could be called known like such as Xanax, which are very commonly used among people to have a feeling of elevated feeling of happiness and joy. That is why psychotherapy is much more recommended as a healthier method rather than drugs. Now we will have Justin to talk about a new facilities that we'll be implementing within the hospitals to help the nurses and other medical workers.
Thank you. The importance of patient environment and patient wellness has been researched heavily. However, the environment of healthcare workers and its relation to mental well being is oftentimes overlooked. Hospital break rooms are mostly considered back ends. Instead, more attention is given to patient and family rooms. It is not enough to have a microwave, a couple of chairs, and to call it a day. As a hospital, we care greatly for our patients, but we should also equally care for our healthcare workers as well. Break rooms add the very needed rest and social interaction for our healthcare workers. To achieve this, we focus on the location of break rooms, a centralized break room, and what are the effective strategies which can be implemented in the break rooms, from adding more greenery to adding more facilities designated for napping. Firstly, in terms of location, next slide, please. A centralized break room is seemingly the most ideal location. Now, why is that? Well, a centralized break room, it is closer in proximity to nursing stations in each floor. Therefore, there will be a decrease of walking distance for nurses. Also, it can improve nurse-to-nurse interaction. So firstly, why is decreased walking distance important? Well, a study in the US found that on average, nurses walk 4 to 5 miles in a 12-hour shift. In comparison, the same study found that average Americans walk only around 2.5 to 3 miles in 18 hours. We are aware that healthcare professions is a taxing job both mentally and physically. To combat the problem of burnout and fatigue, a break room within a short distance is best suited. Reduced walking distance can reduce fatigue amongst nurses. Well, how can a centralized break room improve nurse to nurse interaction? Well, the alternative to a centralized break rooms is having one that is decentralized. The added benefit of this is privacy. However, it goes back to the very first reason in that walking distance during breaks may be undesired because nurses are already tired. Less nurse would be willing to walk all the way to a break room, thereby reducing the interaction between nurses. However, it should be noted that decentralized break rooms does have advantages. As stated, it is more secluded. Moreover, it can actually provide the needed windows, which we will explain the importance to later on. We are aware that there are some nurses who may need seclusion as a way to recharge. Therefore, we are planning to implement the alternate centralized and decentralized break rooms to cater to both groups. Next slide, please. Secondly, in terms of what to put in the break room themselves, we will implement strategies which will have supporting evidence in reducing stress and fatigue. For example, adding more greenery into the break rooms. The basis of this lies on the arts theory, or is the attention and restoration theory. It was found that there was actually a decreased level of cortisol hormones, which is a stress-inducing hormones amongst individuals. This basically states that the high mental effort in nursing, the taxing job of psychiatric nurses, causes elevated amounts of stress. Therefore, focusing on greenery can actually reduce that mental stress, therefore relaxing the mind. It was actually found that 60% of nurses who viewed greenery or outside scenery showed improvements in their concentration, whilst there was a decline in those who weren't exposed to nature or other exterior views. Another addition to break rooms are designated napping areas for nurses. Next slide, please. Many studies have shown association of less sleep with increased level of anxiety and depression. A study found that nurses were more likely to make an error when they had 6 or fewer hours of sleep. While this may seem like a small number, it should be noted that if there were 1,000 working nurses in a hospital, there would be around 34 errors daily. Break rooms will be provided with recliners, sleep pods, and noise-canceling headphones for the very tired nurses. Moreover, a study found that 15 minutes of just napping can actually increase alertness. While this particular statistic is not about nurses, it was also found that pilots who were allowed to rest for 30 minutes during night flight had a 34% improvement in their performances. But most importantly, the function of these break rooms should be functional and effective. This is to ensure that our psychiatric nurses and all healthcare workers have a place within a hospital that they can confide and rest in. The next section will talk about other activities that can bolster interaction amongst colleagues, decreasing level of stress, as well as providing greater work environment for our nurses. Cedra, please.
Thank you. So the third wellness plan that would be useful to boost the mentality among the psychiatric nurses would be team-to-team interaction. So what is meant by that is that through team-to-team interaction, by gathering, we hope to release stress or improve the physical and mental health of psychiatric nurses. So the first activity would be adult-friendly parties. So through the parties, we'll be having performances by singers or by our talented staff and engaging activities like whisper challenge and Pictionary that will help to release some of the stresses that psychiatric nurses faces. And finally, we'll be having free healthy version lunch like sandwiches and pizza to hope to get all the beneficial nutritions that we possibly can to have a healthy lifestyle. Next slide, please. And then the next activity is in terms of physical. So every month we'll be having hiking or 2 yoga sessions and 2 exercise sections, for example, cardio, to boost up the heart rate and to release the stress hormones. Next slide, please. So this activity will actually help to have more connectedness among the employees. So this will not only increase their sense of belonging and also support from each other. As a result, this will change their entire mood and then improve their psychological health. And this will also reduce their blood pressure and heart rate and decrease their stress hormones and enhancing their personal control. So this would result in both in the physical and mental improvement. As a result, this will eventually decreases their stress, anxiety, or any depressive symptoms. So in the end, their level of happiness will be much higher. So they will be more energetic, and they will enjoy their life more. So the next activity will be the change. The next wellness plan will be the changing of time and shifting by Priscilla. Priscilla, please.
The last suggestion we have is the changing of shift. Since psychiatric nurses have large complex workload and long work time, they are overwhelmed. The majority of them are suffer from stress, anxiety, and depression. They have little rest time and overtime work is common in hospital. It is suggested to have a voluntary or special shift for people who have the qualification. For example, psychiatric nurses who retire or have special need in shifting. Those may need to take care of their families. A special shift around 4 to 5 hours a day can reduce the pressure of existing psychiatric nurses they have experience, so they can also teach the young nurse. Next slide, please. Patients get higher quality and safe care because the nurse to patient ratio reduce. Nurse can have longer rest time. They can rest well in the improved bedrooms. With more helper, their pressure can be relieved, less stress and reduce their depression. Medical error caused by fatigue of nurses can be reduced. A study shows that working 12-hour or longer shift and working shift other than day shift increase the risk of a needle injury. Longer the shift is, the higher chance they get an injury. Furthermore, it is found there is 31.6% reduction in occupational injury and illness among registered nurses working in hospital in California after they implement the registered nurse staff ratio law. Medical error and injury caused by fatigue of nurses can be reduced. Although this cannot entirely solve the problem, but it improves the working environment and lightens the heavy burden of psychiatric nurse.
Overall, we understand the difficulties you guys are facing, and thus we are implementing the wellness plan for you guys. As a hospital directors, we care both of our patients and also our staff members. So I really hope that this plan can be beneficial and improve the overall work environment within the hospital and also alleviate the mental stress of all the medical workers. Thank you all for listening, and we wish you all good luck.